All right, so the first thing that we're going to do for this assignment is you're going to take a sheet of paper. This is clearly not a sheet of paper, but this is all I had available at my house. And on campus, we're going to use a few different templates that we can trace circles. So first thing, I just have a plate right here. I'm going to put this more or less in the center of my sheet of paper or panel, whatever we're using. And I'm just going to lightly trace around it with a pencil. And I'm just using, I think this is a 2B. So I don't need this to be really dark. I just need a guide. If you're using really heavy, like let's say you're using a 6B or 8B, I'd be cautious using something that dark because the graphite will really interfere with the lighter value pigments such as yellow. Whether it's a Hansa yellow or even the Cad yellow medium, it's going to kind of corrupt it and probably shift it a little bit more green than you would really want. So just be mindful of that. Try to put this bowl more or less in the center of that. This is not a perfect science, but we're going to try our best to get it to look as best as we can. See how good this ceramicist was. Maybe a little bit wobbly. All right. Let's use this. Wonder if I should have a slightly smaller one. Let me see. What do I want? Yeah. Let's go. I think we can probably use that. Okay. Or let me do this. There's a slightly smaller inner ring that I'll try to use to trace. Okay. Then last but not least, this is going to be kind of the center part. Maybe, yeah, we'll just do this. All right. So the next thing that we need to do is we need to divide this into 12 more or less even wedges. What I like to do is after I've gotten those circles down, try to find more or less, the widest portion of my outer ring. And what we're going to do is we're going to divide it into 4 equal parts initially. So that's going to be parallel with my top edge and bottom edge. And I'm going to do another parallel line for my 2 sides. Hopefully where those intersect, that should be roughly in the center. I think it's pretty good. It might not be perfect, but it's close enough. Now, this is the part that I think students always trip up on. Well, how do we kind of subdivide this again? We need 12 more or less equal wedges for our color wheel, since we have 12 hues on that outer ring. So what I like to do is, since we have our middle point, that intersection, that'll be a pivot point. And then I kind of like to guess, just eyeball you know, about a third for each one of these quadrants. So kind of on the outer edge, I'll just put a little mark, a little dash to see, hey, is that close or is that not? That actually doesn't look half bad. Maybe this one is a little wide, so maybe I might just bring that over about there. Once I get that down where I like it, I just take my ruler and line it up with that little notch that I put down, have the ruler go through our center point or that intersection, and then just lightly draw across. Got that one there. And then we'll do the same thing with this one. And we'll repeat the same process one more time. Doesn't look too bad. We'll do the same thing over here. Oop, that one was a little off, so push this back up there. And then we can line that up, draw it straight through. And at this point, we more or less have our color wheel all set up. And we'll have different templates, whether it's kind of the lampshade for clamp light. That's usually what I use in class. And then we have a few bowls and plates. And then another still life arrangement object that we can use for these nice circles. So now that we have this all set up, you can follow along with the graphic that's on the Canvas site. If you want to put 1A for your Cadmium Red, 2A for your Quinacridone, and if you wanted to label everything on the outer ring in order to help you out, that's fine. You don't have to do that, but if it gives you some direction and clarity, by all means. You can kind of already see on my palette, I did this ahead of time just to make it a little bit quicker and easier. I already have my string of colors for that outer ring. And so I'm going to just come through with one of my brushes and I'm going to start applying that paint. Now, the one thing that I would recommend, I kind of mentioned that Hansa yellow as well as Cad yellow, they tend to be fairly susceptible to, even the graphite to kind of contaminating it. So this is a delicate pigment. It's a delicate hue. So what I would recommend is you probably want to start putting your yellows down first and then work your way to the darker values, or the darker hues, which inherently have a darker value. Especially if you're using predominantly a single brush. You'll want to clean your brush in between. So I'm just going to start off with my Hansa yellow. And this is actually a Hansa yellow light. So we're going to put this here. And when you apply your paint, you're going to want to try to I can see this brush is fraying a little bit more than I thought. But I want to try to make this region you know, controlled in that swatch of color that I put down. So I should eliminate as much of that white space as possible. Now this yellow is just straight out of the tube. I didn't do anything else with it. There's no white, there's nothing to it. And parts of it are kind of opaque, other parts of it are somewhat transparent. That's just the inherent characteristics of this Hansa yellow. Now, one thing that you'll want to do when it comes to this exercise is you're going to want to use a decent amount of paint. If you don't have a whole lot of paint, or if you didn't mix a whole lot of paint, what's going to happen is you're going to kind of scrub to try to get that area covered. And so there's going to be patches within each one of those swatches that are maybe a little bit lighter in value, and then other areas that are a bit darker than value. That kind of variation in value kind of gives us an inconsistent reading on your intent for that mixture. So pretty much this should be fairly opaque, fairly thick paint. I'm going to wipe my brush. Put that brush down. And so I'm just wiping this into a shop towel. Get as much of it off as possible. I know there's still some Hansa yellow on my brush, but I think since I'm going to a cad yellow, that little bit of Hansa yellow that's still on this brush it's so negligible, it's not going to really impact it, especially since I'm going slightly darker in value. It's kind of interesting. This is a cad yellow deep. And that almost looks like an orange. But the way that we're using it for a color wheel, this is pretty much a tertiary. So it is kind of a yellow orange. Or orange yellow, however you want to talk about it. Now the brush that I'm using is an angled brush. I think for this specific assignment, I just like this shape because it allows you to kind of create these corners a little bit better. So I'm just trying to even out the application of this cad yellow. It's not bad. I'll move on. And you can already see that I have everything already laid out. And so this was the benefit of me doing the mixtures ahead of time. So our orange is just cad yellow medium or cad yellow deep, depending on which manufacturer you have. And my cad red, which is right here. Now for our kind of orange red, this is actually cad yellow medium or deep, depending on which manufacturer, and then quinacridone. So, but this looks like there's a natural progression from kind of almost a more like, I don't know, comparatively, this looks lemony yellow. And then as it gets into the deeper reds, these still feel like they're distinct enough. None of these hues look like they're too close to one another. And so that's the benefit of pre-mixing everything on your palette first before you commit to putting anything down on your sheet of paper. So I'm going to take this orange, put it down. And I will admit, like, this is a gorgeous color. When I compare a mixture of these cads to make a cad orange, it looks good. However, if I buy a true cadmium orange, one that is not a mixture of cad yellow deep and cad red, it's just a little bit more saturated. So you can get pretty darn far with creating your secondaries using this warm and cool primary set. But there is a limit. That's when sometimes going out and purchasing a specific paint or hue can be to your benefit. Can just give you a little additional punch. And I know this will take a while for me to go through this entire process. I'll just do a little bit more of applying these mixtures. Now, some of these paints are more transparent than others. So since this particular mixture is comprised of cad yellow deep and quinacridone. Quinacridone is less transparent. I think it is, or sorry, it's less opaque, so it's more transparent. I think it's technically a transparent or semi-transparent paint. Everything's about context. Right now, that looks like a solid red. That's a tertiary though. This is our orange red. Now, it's just pure cad red. And unfortunately, there's just no other way around this. Even though I kind of made up these mixtures ahead of time, just applying them with control and intention can be time consuming. So last but not least, this is just straight up quinacridone. And going from the cad red medium, it's just significantly more transparent. So now I'm going to move on to the secondary. So I'm going to make my violet or my purple. So that was using Ultramarine Blue and my quinacridone. Now I have on the assignment, you need to add a bit of white. That's what the asterisk stands for. If you just mix up the quinacridone and the ultramarine blue, it's going to be so dark in value that we're not going to see kind of the beautiful characteristics of that pigment or of that hue. So I've added white to this already. And I know if I added even more white to this, I might even see a bit more of the saturation or the distinct characteristics of this pigment. It actually looks great on my palette, but seeing it in the context of this color wheel, especially against the pure white of the gesso or the sheet of paper, it looks really dark, which is kind of funny. Just trying to clean up those edges. Okay. Now, the next swatch is, this is our violet. The next one is going to be a violet blue. This is actually just ultramarine blue plus white. And to me, this is just such a gorgeous color. Now, I will admit, you know, I'm putting this down right now. It's like, oh, could this be just your blue? Why is this blue violet? You know, I still feel like this leans a little bit more violet than like what I think would be like a perfect blue. But this is where color sometimes gets somewhat subjective. And we're also dealing with imperfect materials. So I think comparatively, this leans maybe a little too violet for it to just be a perfect blue. But it's a gorgeous color. Clean up that edge. Okay. Now, the next one. This is just my pure blue. This is my Phthalo Blue, just plus white. Now, I think I could probably get away just with using the same brush. I'm gonna try that. So if you get a cerulean blue, especially a cerulean blue hue, that is just Phthalo Blue plus white. Same thing with King's Blue. I think most paint manufacturers, if you get King's Blue, it sounds really nice. It sounds, oh, grand. You look on the back of the tube of paint and it's just Phthalo Blue plus white. Now, Phthalo is also a fairly transparent paint, but since I had to add white into this, so I made a tint in order to see kind of the unique properties and characteristics. Since the titanium white is opaque, it allows for this color to have a lot of coverage. And you don't need a whole lot of Phthalo Blue. Once again, as you probably saw in the other demonstration, Phthalo Blue is an extremely potent pigment and has a high tinting strength, so it overwhelms anything that you mix with it. So you need just a little amount. So now, here is my kind of blue-green. This one, honestly, I'm still kind of on the fence about this mixture. I think it works. It actually looks better here, kind of against the white ground. So this is Cad Yellow, medium, a little bit of it, and Phthalo Blue plus some white. The reason I was kind of questioning this mixture earlier was, well, is there maybe a different combination of phthalo, maybe phthalo with the Hansa, maybe the ratio would be different, and it would probably be a more saturated blue-green. And there might be another variation out there that might be better suited. I tried another variation and actually didn't care for it as much, so I think this still works, but it feels somewhat less saturated than the other hues on the outer ring. So, you know, is that just a limitation to the pigments that we're using? Potentially. So now I'm going to my pure green. This is Hansa yellow and Phthalo Blue plus some white. I mean, this is almost like an electric slime green. And last but not least, and I actually think I am going to get a different brush. I know I could probably clean this with my solvent, but it'll be easier and quicker if I just get a different brush. Because I think the potency of having all of that phthalo in this, if I went over to using the same brush without extensively cleaning it and grabbing my kind of yellow-green mixture, which this is a bit of, it's predominantly actually cad yellow. So predominantly cad yellow and just a little bit of ultramarine blue. Because you don't want it to be so, I guess, green that will make it a lot darker in value, and it will actually make the transition in value between this yellow and this mixture kind of too great. And maybe this could have used even a little bit more yellow in it, now that I'm putting it down. It's not as saturated of a mixture. Part of that is because both the cadmium yellow as well as the ultramarine blue, they have a kind of an inherent bias to it. Cad yellow deep is leaning a little bit more towards red. Ultramarine blue, well, as we've already talked about it, it leans inherently violet. So since those are both leaning towards a red, when you're trying to mix those together to get a green, it's just not going to be as saturated of a green. However, for making a yellow green or a green yellow, I think that's perfectly fine. You want it to look a bit warmer in comparison to your pure green. All right, last thing I'm going to do is we have our outer ring complete. I'm going to now take, this was the mixture for the center. And honestly, maybe my brush could actually be a little bit larger. I'm going to do that. So we need a gray in the center. And to make that gray, it's not going to be a perfect gray. So you're just going to have to try your best. You need to get this part done first. Completing those outer rings of those pure hues using our warm and cool primary set, and then getting your interior mixture done for the center. Those need to be completed first before you start making a color string going directly across. I'm going to demonstrate how to do that color string and that mixing so we can go from pretty much a pure yellow to a nice violet. So I'm going to kind of get reset up and I will demonstrate that. Alright, so I kind of reset up my palette just a little bit. So what we're going to do is we're going to make a color string going from our Cad Red to our secondary mixture for green. And this was using Hansa yellow and Phthalo Blue plus a little bit of white. And so you want to ensure that you have enough paint to work with, especially for the mixtures that you've made, because you're going to need a decent amount of it as you're kind of making this progression from, you know, one side of the color wheel to the other side of the color wheel. And let's just, as a visualization to kind of help us out, this is one of the reasons why we made our gray. I'm going to take that gray and I'm just going to kind of put it more or less in the center. Just cleaning it off my palette knife. This is where having two palette knives really comes in handy. Put this just a little bit further back. And as I've said, you kind of don't need a whole lot of phthalo to make an impact. So let's take some of this Cad Red. I'm just kind of getting some piles out here. Everything from this interior kind of gray that we've mixed, everything on this side, so on the left hand side, should be distinctly red. Everything on the right hand side should have a distinct green bias. So let's go through, and I'm going to take maybe my other palette knife. These are both very potent pigments. So I'm going to think that's not half bad. I can take a little bit of that mixture. Feel maybe a little too similar still. So I'm going to add even more the phthalo green to it. And that doesn't look half bad, actually. This still needs some work over here. I haven't really added anything into this. Actually, don't mind that. I think that's a good, I guess, initial desaturated mixture. I'll take this. Let's come back over, get maybe a smidge more of this. Still feels a little too red. Ooh, I think that's about it. And you can see how this is going from kind of a pure saturated red, Cad Red. It's a little bit more neutralized, so it doesn't have as much potency with that distinctness for the hue. Then it's even further kind of muted down. Then we get to our interior centered mixture for our gray. Then on this side, well, this comparatively still feels more green now, which is exactly what we want. This actually is just a nice green, honestly, but it doesn't have the same sort of intensity as the Hansa yellow and the Phthalo Blue, plus a little bit of white. And so I think there's a really nice progression here. Now, could it get refined? Of course. Now, this is one of those, I think, I mentioned with the initial demonstration that, well, this is where there's a departure from theory and our actual practice. You would think if we're mixing equal parts, let's see if we can try to do that. Equal parts of this phthalo. Can we try to get almost a pure neutral? I don't think we're going to. You think if we're taking those complements, mixing them together, we would get something that is already a perfect gray. And probably not. See, I'm not going to adjust adding a little bit more blue or a little bit more yellow into this, because I want to just see from these states, from this secondary mixture plus this one straight out of the tube, you know, this might be kind of the best neutral that I can get. Now, if I added a little bit of white, let's see, well, I'll just add a little bit of red, see if that's maybe more in the sweet spot. If I add a bit of white to this, it's actually not a half bad gray, but there's still maybe a little bit of too much green in it. A nice gray. It's kind of, it's somewhere in between. I feel like I look at it in one way, it's leaning maybe just a little bit more green, another way, maybe a little bit more red. So I think that that's a good spot. So once you feel like you've done this color string and it looks decent, then you can start to apply it to your actual color wheel. You'll have to do this same process for each one of those hues, so each one of those complementary pairs. So in essence, since we have 12 distinct hues, well, if you're going across, well, you have to do this 6 times. So it's tedious, but once you understand this, man, it opens up so many different options. And I think it helps you understand subtractive color theory, at least a bit more than before you went through this process. And this is all incremental, and hopefully this will help us when we start working from the still life arrangement. So I'm going to switch gears and apply some of this paint to the color wheel. So I am kind of running out of room here. That's fine. I will maybe just place this maybe somewhat precariously right here. So I have my brush. So let's put this down. You will have wasted paint. I know it's frustrating, but it's in your best interest to mix more paint than you think you'll need. You don't want to use like a whole tube, but you can kind of see the quantity on my palette, and that should give you an indication of probably how much you need to mix. Because the last thing I want to do is go through this whole process, start putting something down, and I just don't have enough. So then I have to go through that entire process of mixing something up again. So now let's go back, get this one. And I'll admit, maybe even this mixture that I have right now probably could have mixed up just a little bit more. I think I'll have plenty to get nice opaque coverage. But I'm cutting a little bit closer than I'd want. Luckily this swatch is inherently smaller. And it is interesting. So normally I do this exercise on paper. Since I did this on a gessoed board, this is a little bit better sealed than paper. Even gessoed paper. Gessoed paper is going to be a bit more absorbent. So you actually might need a little bit more paint than I'm using on the gessoed paper in order to get the same coverage. Now what I was going to say was, because this is sealed a bit better because of the gesso on this board, I'm seeing a little bit more of the distinct undertone characteristics. So, which might be slight shifts in temperature or even saturation based on if an area is more opaque, which opaque is typically more of the mass tone, and if it's more transparent, we're seeing the undertone, which can reveal unique characteristics about the pigments that you're using. Kind of in an awkward spot with trying to paint this. Okay. I'm going to try to clean up that edge. There we go. Might not be perfect. And then last but not least, as I have in the announcement, well, for this assignment, I've kind of put on the assignment page that the individual mixtures that you get, especially for the interior swatches, may differ from not only the example or the graphic on canvas, but also from what you're seeing right here. That's fine. Let's say that in your initial mixture for the secondary for green, you had maybe more Hansa yellow. Well, if you had more Hansa yellow, well, it's going to shift a bit more yellow overall. So then all of these other interior mixtures are going to be affected. And then also having a slightly different paint manufacturer. So that will also potentially impact your end result. So what I really am looking for is, does it seem, based on what you've set up for your exterior hues, does it seem like a logical progression from being saturated on this side to getting incrementally and fairly evenly spaced? These should look distinct. It shouldn't be, okay, we got this is really nice and green. This one, it's too subtle of a difference. We need to see very clearly distinct mixtures going from this side to this side. And, you know, we're not doing too many. We only have 2 interior swatches. There should be enough room where they look distinct enough. And so this is going to be your objective, is completing the rest of your color wheel using this same sort of process. And just to clarify, this is known as making a color string, where you're literally going from one side and in a linear progression, you're making variations. Color string could be from one hue to another, or it could just even be a range of values of a single hue or mixture. It's just something that you can plot out on your palette, have a clear direction and variation, so it's easy for when you go to paint, you don't have to always mix that stuff, you know, with your brush at every time you need it. You already have a pile there. So that should more or less be what you need to do to complete this assignment.